Little did I know, as I walked down this trail with Deb 48 years ago, that I would be cruising Still the One, my Sundancer 380, down the Tennessee River, south on the Tombigbee known as the Tin Tom, and southeast across the Gulf of Mexico to Tampa Bay. My desire is to document this trip, to share with my family, because they are still the one to me. And if you'd like to come along on my journey as well, I hope you will enjoy.
Still the one that turns my head. We're still having fun, and you're still the one.
Okay, so I want to talk about the trip and different points about the trip and things that we did. Just kind of give you an overview. We started on September 16th, 2022. Around 8:30, we ran till about 7 p.m. So it's about 10 hours of driving, around 15 miles an hour. We did have some delays with things like locks, things like that. As far as I could that first day, and we got 84 miles. When we got to All Red Marina, nice marina, the folks there were great. Had a little issue with the splitter, but got that fixed. I got that figured out. We used the loaner car and ran over to City Harbor, where we had a nice meal. 166 gallons of fuel, the most expensive fuel there in our entire trip, $5.59 a gallon for gas, $923 for gas. The next stop was Florence Harbor Marina in Florence, Alabama on the 17th. We left around 9:30 in the morning, got in at about 8. We pushed it there. We're running 10 miles an hour except for the last little bit where I bumped it up to 26 across that last lake right before Florence and tried to get through that lock before dark, and we made it just after dark and slipped in there. 98 miles, $5.50 a gallon for fuel. $594 in fuel, which is interesting to me because most of it was at 10 miles an hour. After we left Florence, we went to Bay Springs Marina on the 18th. Left around 9:30, got in around 7. 9.5 hours of drive time. At 10 miles an hour, we did 80 miles, roughly. 97.5 gallons at $5.50 a gallon as well, so $536 in fuel. After Bay Springs, we moved down to Midway Marina. Had a great conversation with the owner's daughter, who was kind of taking over on the 19th. Left at 8 in the morning, got in around 12. So we only went, 4 hours at 10 miles an hour, did 18 miles that day. 23 gallons of fuel at $5.50 a gallon, $126. From Midway, we headed down to Columbus on the 23rd. Left at 9, finished around 4, 7 hours of drive time, around 11 miles an hour, 59 miles, 81 gallons of fuel, $4.56. That's where the fuel dropped, $4.56, so $370 in fuel. It started coming down from that point over. That was after I got on to the Tombigbee. After Columbus, we went to Heffin Dam. I went to Heffin Dam. Deb only stayed with me the first 4 days, and then picked up with me when I got down to Orange Beach. So all of this, rest of this trip down to the Gulf, I did by myself. On the 24th, left at 10 a.m., around 8 hours of drive time, 10 miles an hour, 69 miles. On that trip, did not fill up because I anchored. And then the next day, made it to Kingfisher. After Heffin Dam, went on down to Kingfisher. At Kingfisher on the 25th, got there around 1 p.m., so I only drove 5 hours, 9.5 miles an hour, around 10 miles an hour again, took my time, 49 miles. These are nautical miles, by the way. 129 gallons of fuel at 449, and that ended up being 552. Of that 129 gallons, roughly 10 gallons, 9.5 gallons was used for the generator for that one night stay. So that tells me that I can run the generator, 10 gallons a night, roughly, in evening. Then, after I left Kingfisher, I pushed it a little bit to get to Bobby's Fish Camp. So I left at At 11:30, I left a little late from, this is from Kingfisher, because I'd gone home and I'd come back and I needed to do some things that next morning. So I left a little later. Got in around 6 p.m. right at dark. So I ran 6.5 miles. During that trip, I ran a lot of it at 25 miles an hour. I pushed it. That was probably the longest stretch of running, 25, 26 miles an hour to get to Bobby's Fish Camp. Man, I was nervous because I didn't want to hit anything, and So when I got to Bobby's Fish Camp, filled up 131 gallons of fuel at 457. That was, the cheapest. Actually, Kingfisher was the cheapest gas that I bought along the way. The next night, again, anchored, and that was right above the Mobile River. So I left that morning out of Bobby's Fish Camp at 8. We were going to go out at 7, but when we called up to the lock, we found out the barges were just coming up. They told us it was going to be an hour, so it took an hour for them to get to us. So I went to that anchorage. And then the next morning, I had trouble getting through the railroad bridge. Finally got through it. They wouldn't communicate. I don't know what their problem was. Finally got through it, and then Navionics took me on the backwoods version of the trip into Mobile Bay. Everybody, I talked to after that said, don't do that, but I did, and I ran aground twice. Fortunately, I still had enough water to keep moving, and that is where I think I damaged the ram on the steering. Anyway, that was on the 2nd of October, and left around 8, got into Turner Marine around noon or 1. This was on a Sunday. Nobody was there, so, I just basically found a spot and anchored up. The next morning, I was ready to head to Orange Beach across Mobile Bay. And so I filled up with 154 gallons of fuel at 485, $750. And then I made my way to Sanders Marine on the 3rd. At Sanders Marine, they allowed me to stay inside their walls at a dock for free. The next morning, which would have been the 4th, got up at 7, headed to Sanders Marine at Gulf Shores. When I got into where that marina is, it's tucked in. I mean, tucked in. I can't believe they put the huge boats they put in there. I mean, it's amazing. And I was nervous trying to slide in there without hitting anything. So I got into Gulf Shores on the Tuesday morning around 9 a.m., pushed it a little bit to get there for the bottom job. Bottom job, all the work was done on the boat and replacing the steering ram. They talked about replacing the stripe at the bottom, but that didn't get done. And so when I got back on the 8th with Deb, this is when Deb joined me again. We left out at 8:30, finished at 3, and we made our way to Boardwalk Marine in Destin, Florida. Spent one night there, and then from there went to Treasure Island. So on the 9th, we headed out at 9:30 in the morning till 4 and made our way to Treasure Island Marina. And there we stayed for 3 nights. We went to meals, we hung out by the boat, went out to Shell Island and spent some time there, and yeah, it was really good. And then from there, took Deb to the airport one day on, it was like Tuesday, Monday or Tuesday, so she could go back to Ohio, spend time with her family. Then the next day, I headed out to sea quarters in Carabel. I left out at 7:30, got there around 4:30, 9 hours of travel time, 11 miles an hour, 146 gallons of fuel at 485 a gallon, a total of 95 miles traveled. From there, we sat for 4 days waiting for an opportunity to weather. Finally, it came around, and on the 15th, I got to Steinhatchee, which is Dead Man's Bay Marina, and it was a 7-hour trip. The last 5 miles, I picked it up and ran on in so I could get there before 5. It was 97 gallons of fuel at 460 a gallon. So the next morning was probably the worst worst trip yet that I took, but it was educational. Left at 7:30, headed towards Mar Marina in Tarpon Springs. Got in at 4:30, 15 miles an hour through rain and waves and mess, just mess. 2 to 4, 6. Some of it I ran 20, 23, 24, but the vast majority of it was around 14, 15 miles an hour. 119 miles, 185 gallons of fuel at 476. From there, I went to Clearwater Marina, left on the 18th, 9 a.m., got in around 3, did some fishing on the way, 11 miles an hour, 20-mile trip, no gas after I filled up at Mar. And then on the 23rd, came to Madeira Beach, where I'm at right now. Still haven't topped off in fuel. That was 15 miles, so I've only put like 35, 40 miles on, this tank, so I've got plenty of fuel. And that's where we're at Madeira Beach moorings in Madeira Beach, Florida. And this is where we're going to be for the next 4 or 5 months. So there's a recap.